In 2004, General Motors was in a panic.
Chrysler is cornering the market on the LARPing community. We need a PT Cruiser too.
It's 4 a.m. I can't sleep. Stop this. I'm the prince of insomnia. Call me Noctis. Chevy HHR. You trying to cop this? Cause heated seat settings ain't nobody can top this.
2006 Chevrolet HHR. This HHR features a 2.4-liter inline-4, and while the horsepower isn't great, the car has been running for over 200,000 miles now, since the owner John received it from his aunt nearly 30,000 miles ago. He's only had to change the transmission fluid once, not because he had to, but because he thought that would be good due diligence. It's a car that John wasn't expecting to love, but he fell in love with it just the same. Of course, love for a car typically results in having to deal with problems and working through them. For instance, this car eats brake lines like lonely people eat feelings. It's got a rubber hose replacing a rusted gas line, and it has expensive door handles that are more fragile than the ankle of an action movie love interest.
Just leave her behind. You'll find love again.
This is the luxury model. It's got fake chrome trim pieces around the gauges. It has leather seats, which are very nice. They're kind of slippery. And those seats are also heated, and those heaters come in two settings: toasty warm and hotter than your dad's expectations of the 1990 film Showgirls starring Elizabeth Berkley and Gina Gershon. When the seats are turned on, it feels like a coffee spill that's slowly spreading. But it eventually settles to where you feel like you're sitting on a space heater in your uncle's garage while he complains about how brown folks are prospering a little too much for his liking. But not every problem is something that you can get used to. Now, this car was subject to the General Motors ignition recall, which if you remember that, it had to do with the problem where the key would fall out of the ignition. But this HHR had the opposite problem. The key would get stuck and refuse to budge. You couldn't get this thing out unless you stuck your finger up into this little hole underneath the steering wheel and just worked the clit until the key popped out. It was mostly an issue with the shifter, which had to be replaced with a shifter for Cobalts and the HHRs at the cost of about $300, and that wasn't the only issue. Apparently, the adjusters won't adjust on the rear drums, so John had to take off the wheel and do it manually. The problem is the brake shoes just don't move enough, and his dad's method didn't work for him either. You know, the method where you go in reverse really hard and just slam on the brakes, and that's supposed to set the adjusters for your rear drums. No, that didn't work for John. Naturally, working on this car wouldn't have been a huge issue. After all, it's just a Cobalt, but the battery is back underneath a whole bunch of plastic in the trunk, and to get to it, you need to pop the rear hatch. That'd be fine, but the rear hatch doesn't have a manual release. It's electric only, which meant that he had to climb into the back of the car with a jump pack to get enough juice in the battery just so the electric motor would clunk. It would release at a linear actuator, who knows what it uses. And then up comes the rear hatch. But John loves this HHR for what it is rather than what it's supposed to be. And it was supposed to, well, what was it supposed to be? Well, it's hard to even tell if Chevy knew for sure. Stylistically, the HHR is based off of the third and fourth generation Suburban and the popular Advanced Design series from the mid-20th century, but the retro styling ignored the context behind the cars it was modeled after. I know there was an SS version and that's a different beast, but we're not here to talk about that. I'm sorry. But for this part, we need to go back to school.
It's literary history time.
New historicism. It's a school of literary criticism that centers on the importance of historical context. Imagine for a minute that Henry James lived in the 21st century, and that all of his experiences were filtered through the lens of a postmodern world. We might have still gotten The Portrait of a Lady, but it would have been a very different book, even if the story setting and period had remained exactly the same. That's because historical context matters, not just to the thing being created, but to the person creating it. Had Portrait of a Lady been written today, the contemporary ideas and modes of thought would have found a way to sneak into the book, even if James didn't realize it or intend it. This is all just a long way of saying that the Chevrolet HHR is the new historicism of cars, because it's Chevrolet's attempt to recapture a specific moment in time without recognizing that we're that there were factors that allowed that moment to happen in the way it did. Case in point, the Great Depression. At the time, car manufacturers offered car-based wagons, which was problematic for working professionals because the flimsy wood framework body and the unreliable car chassis weren't suitable to their needs. The average working stiff needed something more heavy-duty for their purposes, which is why Chevrolet decided to develop a truck-based wagon tailored to workers. They developed the first Chevy Carryall Suburban, releasing the first in 1935 for the 1936 model year. It had an all-metal wagon body, a stronger chassis, and more room for workers in need of a stiff ride that didn't involve pegging. Sure enough, the Suburban became popular at a time when the working man needed all the help he could get, especially considering people at this time didn't exactly have money to repair or to replace a woody wagon whose car-based chassis couldn't handle the haul. From the Depression and through the Second World War, the Suburban was a standard of reliability that helped build Chevy's reputation as a quintessentially American brand. After World War II, the Suburban was reworked as part of Chevy's new Advanced Design series, which boasted an even stronger design that also managed to be sleek as well. People who had been fighting overseas for 4 years were finally returning home to the workforce, and the Suburban aimed to be the official truck of that workforce. A truck for opportunities, for putting the ugliness of war behind you and looking ahead to the future. The bigger windshields were every bit as symbolic as they were practical, and the roomier cab with wider doors meant that light trucks weren't just convenient, they were comfortable too. The advanced design ended up being used for Chevy's entire fleet of trucks, and the end result was that Chevy was the #1 selling truck manufacturer in the United States from 1947 to 1955, the key years of the advanced design and the 3rd and 4th gen Suburbans. This was a glory period for Chevrolet, so it's not surprising that they would want to try to return to that period. But the Chevrolet HHR didn't have any of the working man connections that the advanced design Suburban had. It was just a car that piggybacked off the PT Cruiser, and they didn't even do that particularly well. Another issue is that these cars weren't as well made as their forebears. It underwent a series of recalls over its lifespan, including recalls over inadequate head protection for crashes, a malfunctioning dash storage bin, shifter cables that could malfunction and display the incorrect gear, and concerns over ignition lock cylinders, which we already mentioned before. In its first year, the HHR sold 41,011 units, but the number climbed to 101,298 units in 2006 and 105,175 units in 2007. Sales dropped off in the years that followed, and while I don't know they were necessarily awful, they weren't as strong as their competition. In its last year of production, the top compact car sales were selling in excess of 240,000 units for the Corolla, 231,000 for the Cruze, and 221,000 for the Civic. Comparatively, the 75,401 units the HHR sold were small potatoes. The HHR drives like a Cobalt, as it should because it is a Cobalt. The kickdown at wide open throttle will rev to redline, and there's nothing to see under the hood because plastic covers all. Art is a product of its time. A very specific time. Had it happened any other time, the product would transform into something different from what we know it to be. A new historicist studies historical and cultural context and then studies how art relates to that context. The Chevy HHR is a reflection of the concept of new historicism, but is also reflective of a failure at putting its method into practice. Because if Chevrolet had done its homework, they would have realized that this wasn't a car that the day and age really wanted, at least not to the level of its forebears. At best, it would be read as a derivative work, especially after the PT Cruiser. Sure, that car has people who love it and hate it in equal measure, but at least it draws a reaction in a John Cena sort of way. But the HHR doesn't really inspire positive or negative passion to that level. It was automotive wallpaper. Pretty wallpaper, yes. Distinctive wallpaper, sure. But there's got to be more than an aesthetic that ignores a bleaker future in favor of a brighter past.
Chevy HHR is just the car they thought you'd love. New historicism on 4 wheels. If a new Suburban is the car you're thinking of, then this won't be a car that will appeal.